Ethan Roberts, a self-assured millionaire, held an invitation in his hand. It was from his ex-fiancée, Caroline, the woman who had left him for someone else. He couldn't believe it. She had sent the invite as if to rub her happiness in his face. "Is this a joke?" he muttered, tossing the envelope onto the table. His friend Brandon King picked it up and whistled. "That's a low blow. Are you really going?" Ethan scoffed. "Show up alone like a loser? No way. Take someone with you and prove you've moved on." He needed someone who would make an impact and leave Caroline wondering about his plans. Later that day, as Ethan left his office still stewing over the idea, he noticed a young woman sitting on the sidewalk in front of a cafe. Her clothes were ragged and worn, yet her face was strikingly beautiful. Her messy hair fell casually over her shoulders, and her eyes weren't pleading for help. They were defiant. On impulse, Ethan approached her with his hands in his pockets. "Hey, need some cash?" he asked. The woman looked up, not with gratitude, but with a challenging glint in her eyes, as if to decide if he was even worth a minute of her time. Then she smirked and said, "Is this some sort of social experiment? Depending on my answer, you either toss me a coin or keep walking." Ethan's eyebrows shot up. "No one talks to me like that. Come with me to an event, and I'll pay you enough to change your life." She chuckled softly, shaking her head. "Change my life? Wow. Do you always use dramatic lines, or only when you want to sound like some kind of savior?" Her sarcastic tone took him aback more than he expected, but he maintained his composure. "Just dress up, smile, and come with me," he said. "I see you want to be my accessory for the night." Ethan's eyes narrowed. This woman was clearly challenging him on purpose. "If you don't like the offer, I can find someone else," he added. She laughed out loud. "Is this a joke? I don't see a line of candidates waiting around here." Ethan pressed his lips together in disbelief. "How are you turning this around on me?" She stood, brushed off her dress, and stepped closer. "I'll accept," she said coolly, as if doing him a favor, though only because she was curious. Ethan felt a dangerous thrill. "Curious about what?" he asked. With a suspicious smile and eyes that held secrets, she replied, "I'm curious to see how far a guy like you will go." Later, Natalie, her name now, settled into the seat of a sleek car while Ethan sat beside her, watching the city pass by through the window. He sensed she was waiting for some reaction, no questions or hesitation, just acceptance. "You don't even want to know where we're headed," he remarked. She smirked and said, "Some fancy place, I bet." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Aren't you curious? You found me on the street and offered me money to be your date. That's odd enough. I bet you're not planning on selling me into some scheme," she replied with a playful laugh. "Nothing that dramatic, just a wedding," he explained. "So how do you know so much about me?" she asked. Ethan frowned. "You look like a man out for revenge." Natalie shrugged. "Does it matter, as long as I get paid?" Ethan grinned. He liked her attitude. But he still wanted to know more about this woman who seemed to accept everything with ease. Minutes later, the car pulled up in front of a modern beauty salon. Natalie stepped out without hesitation and followed Ethan inside. The salon smelled of high-end products and buzzed with busy stylists. "I want a complete makeover," Ethan ordered. "Hair, makeup, clothes, everything." The staff nodded, and within minutes Natalie was comfortably seated in a styling chair. "If you want to change your mind, now's the time," she said to the stylist as they began working on her hair. "Change my mind about me? I expected someone more impressionable," Ethan remarked, crossing his arms. Natalie closed her eyes as her hair was washed. "I've been in this world before," she murmured. Ethan frowned, but before he could ask more, the stylist ushered him to the waiting area with a polite, "Mr. Roberts, please let us work." He glanced back at Natalie one last time before leaving, intrigued. Hours later, when the stylist finally called his name, Ethan returned to the salon. What he saw made him hold his breath. Natalie now looked nothing like the woman he had met on the street. Her previously disheveled hair now cascaded in smooth, shiny waves, and her once tired face was transformed into one of flawless beauty. Her eyes, enhanced by tasteful makeup, shone with confidence, and the elegant dress and high heels completed her stunning look. Yet, what surprised him most was that she didn't look shocked by her own transformation. She simply studied herself in the mirror as if she had always belonged in this refined world. "You don't seem surprised," she said, catching his curious gaze. "I'm not," she replied coolly. Ethan crossed his arms. "Who are you?" "Natalie?" he asked. She grabbed the purse the stylist handed her and walked toward him with a calm smile. "I'm someone who seizes opportunities when they come," she said. The car then smoothly drove toward the event, a fancy wedding. Ethan had been avoiding but now looked forward to attending with renewed interest. Natalie gazed out the window, unfazed by the luxurious surroundings, as if she had always been part of this world. "You're awfully quiet," Ethan commented, glancing away from the road. "I'm just enjoying the calm," she replied with a faint smile. Ethan frowned. "Most people in your shoes would be dazzled by all this." "Maybe I'm not like most people," she laughed softly. Realizing that pressing her further wouldn't yield answers, he noted there was something intriguing about her mystery. The car eventually stopped in front of an elegant banquet hall, buzzing with elite guests. Couples arrived in limousines and sports cars, flaunting their jewelry and designer outfits, while photographers captured every detail for the society pages. Ethan stepped out first, adjusting his suit, and offered his hand to Natalie, who accepted without hesitation. As soon as she emerged from the car, all eyes were drawn to her. Women whispered among themselves, trying to guess the identity of this striking companion of Ethan Roberts, while men watched with interest. Natalie, however, remained completely composed, lifting her chin and offering a discreet smile as if she were used to being the center of attention. Ethan led her down a red carpet toward the entrance of the hall. "Just follow my lead. Be polite, smile, and don't attract too much attention," he whispered. "Did you bring me here to make your ex jealous, or to hide in the background?" she teased. Ethan pressed his lips together and said nothing. "That's what I thought," Natalie said with a hint of amusement. They passed through the double doors and entered a grand hall where crystal chandeliers hung under golden lights, and the room buzzed with high society figures dressed in their finest attire. Before long, Caroline, Ethan's ex-fiancée, and her new partner, Marcus Thompson, came into view. Caroline looked stunning in a pristine white dress, her smile perfectly designed to charm, while Marcus, the type her family approved of, exuded traditional wealth and predictability. Caroline's eyes met Ethan's briefly. She looked surprised to see him, but then focused on Natalie, her expression hardening as she tried to figure out who this captivating woman was. With a measured smile, Ethan walked Natalie directly toward them. "Caroline," he greeted in a cool, polite tone. Caroline blinked a few times before forcing a smile. "What a surprise. I didn't expect you to show up." "Of course I did," he replied, then glanced at Natalie. "I brought company." Caroline studied Natalie from head to toe. "We haven't been introduced. And you are." Before Ethan could answer, Natalie extended her hand naturally. "I'm Natalie." "Nice to meet you," she said firmly, with elegance and confidence, showing no sign of submission. Caroline hesitated before shaking her hand, clearly uncomfortable. "You look familiar," Caroline observed. Natalie tilted her head with a slight smile. "Do I?" Caroline forced another smile, while Ethan noted the tension in her eyes. She was clearly unsettled. Marcus cleared his throat, attempting to break the awkward silence. "Shall we toast?" he suggested, raising his champagne glass. Ethan nodded, but before he could move, Natalie interjected with a polite smile. "I hope you'll be truly happy. Marriage is serious. You know, I was once engaged." Ethan froze. Caroline and Marcus exchanged glances. "Really?" Caroline asked casually. Natalie sipped her champagne and added, "But it didn't work out. My fiancé decided I wasn't right for his family." Ethan felt a chill run through him. Natalie was sending a clear message, and Caroline's eyes narrowed slightly. "What an interesting coincidence," Natalie smiled. An awkward silence settled before Natalie gently touched Ethan's arm. "Would you like to dance?" he said, surprised. "Dance? Sure. Or would you rather watch your ex try to figure out where she knows me from?" Ethan chuckled. He enjoyed the game Natalie was playing. "Let's dance," she replied, and they moved away, leaving Caroline visibly disturbed as they glided onto the dance floor with the orchestra playing. Softly, while they danced, Ethan looked deeply into Natalie's eyes. "You did that on purpose," he noted. "Didn't I tell you? I've been in this world before." Natalie's face remained impassive, yet there was a hint of a mysterious smile. "You keep surprising me," Ethan murmured, guiding her. "With care." "Is that a good thing or a bad thing?" Natalie arched an eyebrow. "I haven't decided yet," she laughed softly, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "I suppose you've already noticed I'm not exactly what I appear to be." "I've spent time among people like this." Before Ethan could press further, a group of businessmen approached with champagne glasses, eager to congratulate him on showing up. One of them, a well-known investor, shook Ethan's hand. "Finally decided to attend a social event, Mr. Roberts," he said. Ethan returned the handshake and remarked, "I thought it'd be interesting to celebrate the couple." Their attention soon shifted to Natalie, as one of the men asked, "And who is your charming companion?" Natalie stepped forward, extending her hand. "I'm Natalie," she said confidently, leaving the businessmen intrigued. "Your face seems familiar," one commented. Natalie smiled coyly. "Maybe we met at another event," she suggested, leaving the mystery unsolved. Ethan watched Natalie closely. She was blending in too well, and he wondered aloud, "What do you do, Natalie?" another businessman inquired. Natalie picked up a champagne glass, swirled it, and answered, "I enjoy watching the financial markets. The rise of tech investments is fascinating, especially with all these new startups in artificial intelligence." The businessmen were visibly surprised by her articulate response. "That's quite specific," one remarked. Natalie smiled and said, "I just keep up with trends. It all comes down to who gets the insider info first." The men laughed, and Natalie had captured their interest. Meanwhile, Ethan's irritation grew. Natalie wasn't just fitting in, she was dominating the scene. Before he could intervene, a tall, distinguished man, Julian Moore, approached Ethan's friend and influential investor, Marcus. "Natalie, you seem very at ease here," Julian said with genuine interest. Natalie smiled politely. "Maybe I am," she replied. "And what's your connection with Mr. Roberts?" Julian asked. Natalie shot Ethan a playful glance before replying, "Just an interesting partnership." Ethan's temper flared. Natalie was playing her own game, and he didn't like losing control. "You're not just a simple beggar," he interjected as he took the champagne glass from her and handed it to a waiter. "If you'll excuse us, I need to step away with my companion for a minute." He grabbed her wrist and led her to a quieter corner of the ballroom. "Exactly what are you doing?" Ethan demanded through clenched teeth. Natalie smiled. "Just having some fun. You're standing out too much. Wasn't that the plan? To make your ex jealous?" Ethan narrowed his eyes. "You play very well," he remarked. Natalie tilted her head. "You don't like it when you can't control the situation, do you?" Ethan let out a short laugh. "You're more than just a simple street girl," he said. Natalie crossed her arms, and it took him a moment to register her meaning. Just then Caroline appeared beside them. I hope you're enjoying the party, she said coolly. Natalie replied, very much. Before Ethan could speak, Caroline forced a smile. Natalie, I feel like we've met before, she insisted. Natalie returned a shrug. High society can be a small world, she said. Ethan noticed Caroline pressing her lips together. Where do you know Natalie from? Caroline asked pointedly. Natalie smiled. I think it's more fun if that remains a secret. Caroline let out a soft laugh, though her eyes were sharp with suspicion. Mystery always adds intrigue, she said, then turned to Ethan. Can we talk for a minute? Ethan nodded, but before he left, he cast one last look at Natalie. She simply smiled, as if she knew exactly what she was doing. Ethan followed Caroline to a private balcony where the night was chilly and the city lights sparkled in the distance, yet the woman's intense gaze burned like fire. Who is she? Caroline asked bluntly, arms crossed. She's my companion, Ethan replied. Caroline scoffed. Don't treat me like a fool. I know the type of woman you usually bring to these events, and she doesn't fit that mold. A surge of irritation flashed in Ethan's eyes. What do you want to know? Caroline pressed. Where did she come from? He hesitated for a moment. Caroline's eyes lit up. My God, she whispered. You found her on the street, didn't you? Ethan didn't deny it. His silence spoke volumes. This is unbelievable, Caroline said with a mix of anger and disbelief. You brought a beggar to make me jealous. I brought a smart, confident woman who fits right in. Caroline's tone grew cold. A woman who seems to know too much. For someone who was supposed to be homeless. She belongs here whether you like it or not, Ethan snapped. Don't play games with me, Caroline. I have the right to know who I'm dealing with. Caroline raised an eyebrow. Maybe you don't, but I do. Caroline straightened up as if making a decision. If I were you, Ethan, I'd be careful. This woman didn't just appear by chance. She turned and walked back into the hall, leaving Ethan with his doubts. Natalie, meanwhile, moved confidently among the guests. It was clear that ever since she arrived, everyone had been trying to guess her identity, yet she navigated the crowd like she'd always belonged. Soon, Caroline confronted her. You dance well, Caroline remarked. Natalie smiled. Thanks, and you speak well too. You know how to carry yourself at an event. Caroline said, I appreciate the compliment. Natalie replied calmly. It wasn't really a compliment, just an observation. Caroline narrowed her eyes. You think you know me? She asked. Natalie simply said, I'm still figuring you out, took a sip from a waiter-delivered glass of champagne, and melted back into the crowd. Inside the car later that night, as they drove home, Natalie noticed Ethan was unusually quiet. Do you want to ask me something? She ventured. I do, he answered, keeping his eyes on the road. But I'm not sure you'll tell me, she smiled lightly. Depends on the question. Ethan made a sharp turn and asked, Who are you really, Natalie? She relaxed her posture and said, I'm the woman you chose to make an impression on your ex. Ethan's jaw tightened. You know too much already. You act as if you've always belonged in this world. She stayed silent. Ethan pulled up in front of his hotel, turned to her and said, I had you checked out. Natalie didn't seem shocked. And what did you find? He pressed. Nothing. No records, no history. It's as if you erased your own life, she answered with a small smile. Maybe some things need to be erased for safety, she added. Ethan felt a mix of frustration and fascination. I don't like mysteries, he muttered. Then maybe I'm not the right person for you, Natalie said as she opened the car door and walked into the hotel without a backward glance. Ethan sat for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. She was hiding something, and he was determined to find out. Later, Natalie pulled out a disposable phone from her bag, typed a brief message, and began investigating. Within seconds, a reply came. It's time for you to decide your next move. Natalie quickly deleted the message and sighed quietly, knowing she couldn't keep her secret hidden much longer. Ethan was never a patient man. He wanted straightforward answers and complete control. But Natalie was a mystery that defied his logic and that bothered him more than he cared to admit. That morning, as he sipped his coffee in his office, his thoughts still lingered on the night before. Natalie knew things she shouldn't. She acted like she belonged in high society, even though no records of her existed anywhere. It was as if she had wiped her past clean. Picking up the phone, Ethan called someone he hadn't contacted in a while. "I need you to dig into someone for me," he said curtly. After a brief chuckle on the other end, the voice asked, "Roberts, who's—"
"The target?"
"Natalie," Ethan replied after a pause. "But use only her first name, it makes it more interesting. I want to know everything. Where she came from, who she truly is, and why she's hiding something. Give me 48 hours. Ethan hung up and stared out his office window at the city below. Natalie, it turned out, had a direct connection to Caroline that changed everything. Later that evening, while Ethan pored over documents in his office, Natalie's image kept flashing in his mind. The anger in her eyes, the vulnerability he'd seen when she never backed down. Suddenly, he grabbed his car keys and drove to the hotel where she was staying. He needed to see her, to get the truth straight from her lips. After a few seconds, the door opened to reveal Natalie with a tired look and slightly messy hair. "Ethan," she said, her voice carrying surprise, "we need to talk." She stepped aside and let him in. "I didn't expect you to show up late," she noted. "I don't announce my visits," he replied, crossing his arms. "Can we talk?" she asked softly. "I want to know the truth," he said bluntly. "The truth about why you accepted my offer without hesitation." Natalie hesitated, then said, "Because Caroline destroyed my family." Those words made Ethan's stomach twist. He already suspected as much. "Caroline was behind my father's downfall, wasn't she?" he pressed. Natalie moved toward the window, hugging herself. "My father, Richard Bennett, owned one of the largest construction companies in the country. He was a respected man until he trusted the Harringtons. Caroline came on board as a strategic partner, someone he thought he could rely on. But she was manipulating him, making fraudulent deals, and siphoning money without his knowledge. When everything fell apart, my father was accused of corruption. He lost everything, our home, our dignity, and he passed away before he could clear his name." Ethan felt a pang as Natalie continued. "After that, my mother got sick, and I tried to fight to prove his innocence, but Caroline had already shut all the doors on me. I was left with nothing." Ethan moved closer and gently lifted Natalie's chin so that she met his gaze. "You survived on the streets, didn't you?" he said softly. "Yes, and that's how I learned never to trust anyone again." "You don't have to face this alone," Ethan murmured. Natalie pulled away slightly. "I don't need saving," she insisted. "I know, but that doesn't mean you can't help," he replied, taking a deep breath. "I'm confused about what I feel when I'm with you." After a long silence, Natalie finally looked at him. "What does that mean?" he asked. "It means you make me uneasy. I've never felt this way before," she admitted. "Does that bother you?" he pressed. "Maybe it's best if we keep our distance," she said, shaking her head. "I can't do that," Ethan countered. Natalie looked away, clearly troubled by the conversation. "Nothing changes. I still know who you are." Clenching his fists, he asked, "And what about Caroline?" The mere mention of her name snapped Ethan back to reality. "If what you said is true, I don't know who Caroline really is," Natalie said slowly. "But I do, and I won't stop until I settle the score." Ethan fell silent, aware he couldn't convince her otherwise. "Then I'll be by your side," he promised, and Natalie managed a bittersweet smile, even knowing the risk. Later that night, Ethan's phone rang. "We have a problem," his investigator said. "Caroline already knows you're involved, and she's not happy. Ethan's heart pounded. What is she planning? I don't know yet, but someone's digging for dirt on Natalie. Keep me updated, the investigator added before hanging up, leaving Ethan with a heavy heart. Caroline wouldn't leave Natalie alone, and Ethan knew he had to act fast. The next morning, he found Natalie on the hotel balcony, sitting on the E4 ground with her arms wrapped around her knees, staring at the horizon. He approached slowly and knelt beside her. You know she's found out, right? He said. I know, Natalie replied softly, but she won't stop. Ethan studied her slightly disheveled hair, the weariness in her eyes, and felt a tightening in his chest. Natalie blinked back tears, one escaping down her cheek. Instinctively, Ethan pulled her into a tight hug. It's going to be okay, he whispered, and she simply closed her eyes, resting her face against his chest. In that quiet moment, without words, they both knew they were in this together, and that Caroline had no idea what was coming. Ever since their conversation the previous night, Ethan had felt restless, determined to take revenge, not just for Natalie, but for himself. He had nearly married a woman capable of destroying lives, and now he had to find out how far Caroline would go to hide her secrets. That morning, as he reviewed reports in his office, he received a call from his private investigator. We have a problem, Ethan, the investigator said. Caroline is up to something. My contacts say she's gathering information on Natalie, and she's already contacted lawyers and journalists. If she's doing that, it means she has something big. Ethan gritted his teeth. What did she find? I'm not sure yet, but tell me as soon as you know. He threw his pen down, stood up and said, Find out what it is before she makes her move. I'm on my way to see Natalie now. Ethan arrived at the hotel and knocked hard on Natalie's door. After a few tense seconds, she opened it, surprised to see him looking so tense. What is it? She asked. Ethan stepped inside without waiting for an invitation and closed the door behind him. Caroline is making a move against you, he said, his eyes narrowing. What do you mean? Natalie asked. She's gathering information and planning. Something big. I heard she might even expose you publicly, Ethan explained. Natalie sighed, crossing her arms. I knew this would happen, and you're strangely calm about it, she said, half laughing. After everything I've been through, do you really think a scandal will scare me? Ethan admired her strength even as danger loomed. I can protect you, he promised. Natalie raised an eyebrow. I don't need a savior. This isn't about saving me. It's about stopping Caroline. Stepping closer, she looked deep into his eyes. So, what are you going to do? Ethan gently cupped her face. Whatever it takes, he said. For a moment, they just stood there, lost in each other's eyes until Natalie's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, and her face tensed. What is it? Ethan asked. She showed him a message, an anonymous warning saying, Be careful who you trust. The past always comes back to haunt you. Ethan took the phone, read the message, and then handed it back to her. She's trying to intimidate you, he said. Natalie deleted the message. That means we're getting close, she murmured, and then added, We need to act before she does. The next day, a scandal broke. Every major newspaper carried headlines about Madeleine Bennett, from luxury to the streets, about the woman who lost everything, and about the ex-fiancée of Ethan Roberts being involved in corruption scandals. The media spared no detail of the Bennett family's downfall, painting Madeleine as a deceptive opportunist. Caroline had made the first move at the office. Ethan read every article with burning fury. When Madeleine walked in, he immediately asked, Did you see this? She nodded, tossing a magazine onto the table. Caroline is trying to ruin me again, he said, clenching his fists. That won't happen, Madeleine replied coolly. Ethan gently lifted her chin so she could meet his eyes. I never lose, he said. his gaze steady with hope and determination. "Let's make sure she loses this time," he added. "It's time to bring Caroline Harrington down," he declared. They stared at each other, unsure how it would all end. The scandal had dominated headlines for days, with Caroline resorting to dirty tricks, twisting her past to seem like an opportunist trying to re-enter high society. Yet Madeline remained unfazed. She had waited years for this moment, and wouldn't let it break her. Ethan knew Caroline wasn't finished yet. She was planning one final blow. That evening, Madeline received an unexpected invitation, a private dinner at an exclusive club. Clutching the invitation tightly, she read it over and over. Ethan, lounging on his couch at the hotel room, scoffed, "This is obviously a trap." "I'm not going to run," Madeline replied defiantly. "I'm going." Ethan pressed his lips together. "Madeline, this is my moment," he said. "I'm not running." He ran a hand through his hair and said, "Let's make sure Caroline is the only one who loses tonight." At the lavish mansion, bathed in lights and filled with select guests, Madeline arrived alone in a striking black dress that exuded power and mystery. Ethan was already there, blending into the crowd and watching every detail. Soon, Caroline appeared. "I'm glad you accepted my invitation. You didn't really have a choice," Caroline sneered. Madeline picked up a glass of champagne from a waiter. "I hope you've enjoyed all the attention," Caroline continued. "The media loved your story. I'm used to being the center of attention, aren't you?" Caroline's eyes flashed with anger for a moment before she quickly regained her composure. "Madeline, you've lost again. No matter what you do, you'll never be someone important," Caroline snapped. Madeline smiled coolly. "You're wrong, Caroline." Caroline's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" At that moment, Ethan appeared by Madeline's side, his presence making Caroline stiffen. "Dear Caroline, it looks like you haven't read today's papers," he said, handing her an envelope. Caroline opened it and paled as she read through the dossier detailing undeniable evidence of her involvement in the scandal that ruined the Bennett family. "This is fake," Caroline whispered, her hands trembling. "No, it isn't," Madeline countered triumphantly. "And by tomorrow morning, it'll be all over the front pages." Caroline lost her composure completely. "You can't do this to me," she cried. Ethan's tone turned icy. "Just like you did to Madeline," he said. Caroline looked around, realizing that all eyes were on her. The scandal had begun, and her reputation was in ruins. Before she could react further, 2 police officers and a prosecutor stormed in. "Miss Caroline Harrington, you are under arrest for financial fraud, embezzlement, and market manipulation," one officer announced. The room fell silent. "This is ridiculous. I am Caroline Harrington, and now I'm a criminal?" Caroline stammered. "Your only mistake was thinking you'd never get caught," Ethan replied coolly as Caroline was led away by the officers. Madeline exhaled deeply. For the first time in years, she felt free. The next day, Caroline's arrest dominated the news. Her financial empire crumbled within hours as investors and allies abandoned her. Later that evening, Madeline and Ethan sat together in his penthouse, looking out over the city. Madeline held a glass of wine but didn't drink, lost in thought. "We did it, Ethan," she said softly. "We really did." He smiled and added, "And now, Madeline, it's time for a fresh start." Feeling an unfamiliar tightness in his chest, Ethan admitted, "I want to help you." Madeline looked skeptical. He stepped closer, handed her an envelope and said, "This is a proposal for a new business, a company in your name." Madeline blinked in surprise. "You want to start something for me? A business of my own, with my name, my independence?" "I'm not doing charity here," Ethan laughed lightly. "This is a partnership. You're talented and visionary. I want you to have something that's yours." After a long pause, Madeline sighed. "All right, but on one condition." "What condition?" Ethan asked, intrigued. "I do it my way," she stated firmly. Ethan smiled. You always do. The air between them warmed with an intense, lingering feeling. He pulled her into a kiss, and this time, there were no barriers, no unspoken feelings, just pure emotion. Ethan held her tightly, afraid she might slip away, and when they pulled apart, Madeline softly whispered, "Good night," before turning and leaving. Ethan stood silently, knowing deep down that she felt something too. In the following days, a new company called Bennett Consulting was born, a strategic investment and analysis firm. Madeline threw herself into building the business, reconnecting with old contacts and re-establishing herself in the corporate world. Ethan remained by her side, supportive yet unobtrusive. One evening, as he watched her work, he said, "It's been 3 months since you started this company." He tossed a small box onto her desk. Madeline opened it to find a silver keychain engraved with the letter M. "To celebrate," Ethan said with a smile. "Thank you," she replied, warmth spreading through her. "Will you ever stop running from me?" he asked, a hint of vulnerability in his tone. "I'm not asking for anything, I just want to know if there's a chance," she admitted, her heart pounding. "It's okay," Ethan said gently. "I'm patient." As he left, Madeline exhaled deeply, realizing she was close to giving in, though the thought both thrilled and scared her. The next day, as usual, Madeline arrived early at the office, immersed in reports and meetings. With the recent attacks on her company having subsided, she could finally focus on growth. Yet, something was off. Ethan hadn't shown up that morning. Normally, he'd drop by with a coffee or a teasing comment. As hours passed, her unease grew, and by 8 in the evening, she couldn't wait any longer. Grabbing her coat, she drove to Ethan's penthouse. Arriving, she rang the doorbell repeatedly. No answer. Her heart raced as she used the spare key Ethan had given her for emergencies to unlock the door. Inside, the apartment was dim and silent except for the low hum of a television. That's when she saw him. Ethan lay on the couch under a thin blanket, his face pale and his breathing heavy. "Ethan, you have a fever," Madeline exclaimed, rushing to him and placing her hand on his forehead. "It's just the flu," he murmured weakly, his voice hoarse. "I'm taking you to the hospital," she insisted, reaching for her phone, but Ethan held her wrist. "No, I just need to rest. I hate needles. They take too much of my blood," he muttered. "You're impossible," Madeline sighed, frustrated, yet caring. Ethan closed his eyes, exhausted. Madeline then went to the kitchen to prepare hot tea and get a damp cloth. Returning, she knelt by his side and placed the cool cloth on his forehead. "This should help bring down your fever," he said softly, meeting her gaze. "You didn't have to come," he added. "I did," she replied. That night, Madeline took care of him, making tea, changing the cloth, and staying by his side until she dozed off on the floor, her head resting near his chest. The next morning, Madeline woke to the gentle touch of Ethan's fingers in her hair. "Did you stay here all night?" he asked, his voice stronger. "You were in bad shape. Someone had to take care of you," she said with a smile. "I feel much better. I think I had the best nurse in the world," he joked. Madeline got up to make breakfast: fresh bread, neatly sliced fruit, orange juice, and strong coffee. When she returned with the tray, Ethan watched her closely. "I love you, Madeline," he said after a deep breath. She froze for a moment before replying, "I know you feel the same. I saw it last night in the way you worried about me." "I love you too," he murmured as he pulled her into a tight embrace, a smile lighting his face. "You're so persistent, it was worth every moment," he added as they separated, and Madeline served breakfast. Later, Ethan told her to take the day off, saying he wanted to surprise her. Hesitant but curious, she asked, "Where are we going?" "It's a surprise," he replied. Ethan then drove her to a secluded cabin on a private beach. As soon as they stepped out, Madeline was speechless. "This is beautiful," she breathed. "I knew you'd love it," Ethan said with a smile. They spent the afternoon strolling along the shore, enjoying the ocean breeze and chatting about everything. Later, sitting on a rock, Ethan looked at her thoughtfully. "Before I met you, I was arrogant and only cared about power and myself," he confessed. "Then you came along and challenged me, in a way that first annoyed me but then intrigued me. You were the first person who dared to stand up to me, and that made me realize I was surrounded by yes-men. You changed my view of the world." Madeline's heart tightened. "I never wanted to change you," she said softly. "But you did. You made me a better, more human and humble man," Ethan replied, holding her hand tightly. "I fell in love with this new version of you," she added. Ethan then stood and pulled something from his pocket, a small box. Madeline's eyes widened when he opened it, revealing a sparkling diamond ring. "Madeline Bennett, I want to do this the right way. I want to love you with respect, patience, and all my heart. Will you marry me?" Without hesitation, she smiled and said, "Yes." Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her passionately, sealing their promise. As the sun set over the beach, they returned to the cabin with no more doubts. They truly belonged together. "I still can't believe we're engaged," Madeline said, gazing at the ring. Ethan grinned and said, "I always knew this day would come. You just took your time accepting it." "You never give up, do you?" she teased, and his eyes sparkled with affection. That night, Ethan prepared a special dinner on the cabin's terrace. Candles lit the table as the sound of crashing waves set the perfect mood. "Are you cooking?" Madeline joked, while admiring the beautifully plated dish. "I wanted to impress my fiancé," he replied, pouring wine for both. They toasted to their future, clinking glasses and enjoying dinner filled with laughter and loving glances. After dinner, Ethan took Madeline's hand and led her to dance under the stars. "Remember our first dance?" he asked. "I was insanely jealous," she recalled with a laugh. "But now I know I never had to be. I was always meant to be yours." Madeline rested her head on his chest as they danced under the starlit sky, realizing she no longer needed to hide from her feelings. Months later, the big day finally arrived. Madeline had never imagined dreaming of a wedding, yet here she was, dressed in white, about to say "I do" to the man who changed her life. The ceremony was held in a beautiful garden by the sea, with white flowers decorating the altar and elegant chairs neatly arranged for the guests. The sound of the ocean provided a magical backdrop as Ethan stood at the altar in a sharp black suit. When Madeline appeared at the aisle, his heart skipped a beat. She looked breathtaking. Her hair fell in soft waves, and her delicate dress accentuated her beauty, while the sparkle in her eyes captivated him the most. Madeline walked toward him with an emotional smile. At the altar, Ethan held her hands and whispered, "You look beautiful." Tears welled in her eyes as the officiant spoke about love, partnership, and building a life together. When it was time for vows, Ethan took a deep breath and said, "From the moment I first saw you, you challenged me. You never bowed to me or blindly accepted my decisions, and that's why I fell in love with you." Madeline's eyes filled with tears as she replied, "You taught me to be a better person. I now know that power and money mean nothing if I don't have someone by my side to share life with. I promise to love, respect, and make you happy every day." Overwhelmed with emotion, she continued, "I spent my life fighting alone, thinking I could never trust anyone. But you were persistent and never gave up on me, and today I know I never want to live without you." They exchanged rings, and when the officiant declared them husband and wife, Ethan pulled her into a passionate kiss as the guests applauded. Their honeymoon was perfect. They traveled to stunning destinations, cherishing every moment. When they returned, life as a married couple was even better than they had imagined. Ethan spoiled Madeline, bringing her coffee in bed every morning, while she reciprocated with romantic dinners. Their love only deepened, but then Madeline began feeling strange, constantly tired and nauseous. One morning, in the bathroom, her heart raced as she looked at a pregnancy test showing 2 lines. Overwhelmed with emotion, she realized she was pregnant. Later, when she visited the doctor, the surprise was even greater. She was expecting twins. Returning home, Ethan found Madeline sitting on the couch, clutching the ultrasound. "What's wrong?" he asked gently. With shining eyes, she said, "I'm pregnant." Ethan froze for a moment, before breaking into a huge smile. "Oh my goodness," he laughed, pulling her into a strong hug. "We're having 2 babies." He kissed her deeply and said, "You just gave me the best news of my life." Amid tears and laughter, she replied, "I love you so much, Ethan, and I love you even more." In the following months, life became an emotional roller coaster. Ethan grew even more protective, constantly spoiling Madeline. He talked to the babies at bedtime, gave her foot massages, and always made sure she didn't overdo it. At a baby shower surrounded by friends and family, they learned they were expecting a boy and a girl. Ethan whispered, "We built an empire together, and now we'll build a family." Madeline's heart overflowed with happiness, as she realized she now had everything she'd ever dreamed of: a home, true love, and a growing family. What do you think of Madeline and Ethan's journey? Leave your thoughts in the comments, rate this story from 0 to 10, and subscribe to stay updated on more heartwarming tales.